Hey everybody, welcome to the blockout portion of the videos. So as you can see, I went ahead and started on the blockout. I did this because I wanted to save some time. I'm going to go ahead and speed up the majority of the rest of the blockout process. Quickly, I just wanted to show you, there's nothing too complicated about this blockout. It's just some very simple box modeling. And the thing that I wanted to go ahead and show was that I went ahead and when I started, I ended up just using a cube and I split it in half. And you can see that I've labeled drawer 1 and then I've got drawer 2. Right, so if you can imagine, this was just basically a cube at first, and then splitting it into, two separate cubes for the cabinets here, for these two things. And at first what I did, and didn't actually work out super well, was I broke it into a cube, and then I basically angled it where the concept was, and then I had the smart idea of trying to just model it out from this direction, which sometimes you can, because when you're modeling from an awkward angle, you can like set the pivots by hitting D, and then you can just like click where you want the pivot to be. And sometimes that works. What I found though, the best way to go about this was to basically go ahead and you can see that I've lined the pivot up where the hinge is going to be. And so once I actually had it, if I can put it back here, once I actually had this cut out in the right shape that I wanted to, I actually just rotated this. I took the pivot and put it right where the hinge would be, and then I rotated it 90 degrees, you can see here. And this way, that just made it really easy for me to go ahead and model. I can bring the reference over here. It made it really easy for me to basically model this at what it would be at 90 degrees, and then just modeling it back where it's at 0 degrees and it's just front facing. I just realized that was probably going to be the easiest way to go about this. Like I'm always kind of doing things like that when I'm doing blockouts, is I'm trying to figure out the best way to model something, specifically because, I mentioned earlier, if this asset was to be animated and someone, the animators needed this to open and close for whatever reason. Same with this top part of the little chest here. I have the pivot back where the hinge would be back here. So you can just kind of open and close this and you can kind of see, what this thing would look like. And it's also good too, because, once you have the actual, the moving parts working, you can just get a better sense for, how to continue building this thing out. So you can see if I went ahead and just, they're all groups. So that the pivot of my group is where the hinge would be. So you can just see, I can open this up and I can start to kind of play around with, just what the overall composition looks like and seeing if I can, better match, what the concept would be. So I just want to kind of go over, where my thought process is. And, when I start to do blockouts, like how I can aim pretty close to, the actual concept itself. If I can go ahead, I'll pull the concept up. Something that I do that's really helpful right off the bat, I look at, the different sizes and the shapes of everything in comparison to one another. So overall, I'll start looking at shapes. Like if I want to actually model this object right here, the first thing I start to do is I start looking at how thick the edges are from one another, right? So I look at the thickness of this edge compared to, say, the length of, this cabinet here, or like the thickness of this edge compared to this edge and, this edge. So once you start comparing, the different sizes of edges and the angles to certain things, that's kind of like a good way to figure out if you're on the right track in terms of actually like really nailing the concept down and getting the proportions correct. And same goes for like this space in here, right? So if you can look at this this overall, kind of boxy shape here, I know that this height of this box, even though you can't see, because this drawer is open, I can assume that the height of this box here is probably the height of this drawer right here. Being able to, look at the size and the shape of how long this is, and then I can go through and kind of just look at, this edge in comparison to how long this edge is, and then split that up. And then you kind of just, I'm always just, looking at the model and I'm looking at all of the size comparisons. And one thing to take note too is that sometimes a concept, just because it looks like it works in 2D, like all of this looks like it functions pretty well in 2D. You know, there's a lot of callouts, but sometimes, you know, in 3D, some things just don't line up perfectly, and that's totally okay. So if you're finding yourself struggling really hard with trying to, you know, get the proportions right, and maybe, you know, something's just off and you can't get it to look 100% correct, like the concept, that's okay. I think that if you can get somewhere between like 90% of the concept, I mean, that's quite a lot. If you can get 90% in 3D of the concept, to me, I think that's still a win. The things that you should be worried about the most is the overall silhouette. Like if I took a look at this and I look at the concept, does anything jump out at me that looks like it's completely wrong? Yes, you know, if you like maybe, you know, this drawer right here, maybe this is like pulled down here and compared with like this size cube or square right here, so maybe that's off. So little things like that, sure, you know, you can kind of ignore that, but overall, right, I'm looking at the overall. That's what I care about: the shapes, the proportions. Does it function? Like, does this thing close and open? Like if I actually went through, because a lot of the times you'll have this, like in the industry, if you're working on something, you might have a lead come over or an art director or someone and say, hey, like, does this actually like close all the way? Like, does it work? So you should be able to, you know, say, oh yeah, of course, you know, you can just come here and, you know, close everything up. And a lot of the times this is going to, you know, it's going to make an art director or, you know, even an animator or a designer, whoever it might be, it's going to make them happy to see that you're thinking about these things and you're not just thinking about nailing the concept and just trying to make it look pretty. Because a lot of the times in, you know, in the industry, you're going to be making things that are animating for someone, or, you know, it's not just about making the concept. You know, you always want to try to think about a lot of other factors when you're making stuff and not just trying to make a pretty concept. At least that's what I like to do. And honestly, at this stage, I do care about, you know, fairly clean modeling to a point. Realistically, I'm trying to model this as efficiently and as quickly as I can, and trying to be as iterative as I can. I'm not worried about clean edge flow at all, to be honest. I'm just kind of worried about making sure that I don't have any, you know, errors in my geometry. And a lot of the times what you can do, at least what I do to try to fix that, is if you're modeling along and you think that maybe something's wrong, you might have n-gons everywhere, or you might have something wrong with it. What you can do is you can just take the asset and hit 3, at least in Maya. You can hit 3 and do a smooth preview. And if you do this, you'll see if something's wrong. You'll get a little kind of error down here that's saying that the smoothing is off because you have the meshes aren't in tris and quads. So this is actually sort of a method I use quite a bit to make sure that I don't have any issues in my topology, because the next step after the blockout is to bring all of this into ZBrush and start sculpting away. And if you have issues, a lot of the times ZBrush will just end up deleting the faces that have problems. So if you can't find it inside of Maya, ZBrush will certainly find it for you. Or, you know, sometimes if it's bad enough, ZBrush won't even open the mesh for you. So that is something to keep in mind. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go ahead and I'll speed up the rest of this video. In the blockout stage, it is important, and I do want to make sure that I cover very specific things as I've done and talk about how I like to block things out. But I also want to, you know, be mindful of your time, because I know that modeling and watching a lot of this stuff isn't the most exciting. But I will make sure to go ahead and to record the rest of this process. I will speed up the video so that way you don't have to watch it in real time. And afterwards, when I'm completely done, I will come back and I'll kind of talk about any issues that I ran into or things that I think that are worth mentioning to all of you. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this process video. right, welcome back everybody. So as you can see, the blockout mesh is almost complete. You can see that the only thing that's pretty much missing on here is a lot of the vegetation that's in the concept. So if I bring that over here, you'll see that I don't have any of this, the veg in here, and like the mushrooms, and there's a reason for that. I thought about it when I was kind of modeling it and doing the blockout. I kind of thought to myself that it would be best to probably use a separate texture sheet for it, just because I like to organize things that way. And in a production, normally I probably wouldn't be doing vegetation with an asset. I would probably be doing that a little separate. The other things that are not modeled in the blockout are the pieces of paper that are kind of like stapled to or pinned to the sides of the wood. And that's because, for the same reason, I will probably end up doing that either on the same sheet with the vegetation, or I might even do another sheet and just have those pieces of paper be on here separately, because I figured what I'll probably end up doing is sculpting those out as well and giving them a little bit of bevel and dimension to them, instead of it just being a flat piece of paper. You can see that I actually did have a piece of paper, or just a plane rather, that is supposed to just be the representation of the paper. But then after I did one, I kind of thought about it for a second, and I realized that it would probably be better to just sculpt it out. I think that would give me a little bit more character in it, and it would kind of go along with the rest of the chest that's also sculpted. So like you can see here in the concept, you see how it has, some of these frayed edges, and it's got some little missing pieces and cuts out of there. So you could definitely do that with a mask and just do like a simple plane and a mask in Photoshop. But I think that, I'll show you a little later on when I get to this stage how I tackle something like this, and, still using the same techniques that you've probably already heard of, but just in case, it'll be fun to walk you through that. So as I'm, sure that you saw in the video, and as I mentioned before, one of the things that I really cared about, even though the concept only, shows the drawers open just a little bit, and the chest is open just a little bit, as I mentioned before, I did want to keep checking to make sure that it looked like it could function. I think that for the most part, I think that the proportions are pretty close. If I were to have just modeled this one-to-one to the concept and modeled it to just fit the reference here, I would have gotten a little bit closer. But because I wanted to make sure that everything closed and fit, I think some of the proportions are just a little bit different than what's in the concept, but that's totally fine, because now what we have is basically a fully functioned chest that can open and close. The drawers can open and close as well, and they're all they fit nice and neat inside each other. So that's, if you notice that, because I definitely noticed it, that's something that, that's the reason why I decided to go ahead and just take some artistic liberties to just kind of, make things function as well. But overall, there is nothing really unique to my process, I guess. I mean, it's just, it's I'm sure most of you have seen or made like tons and tons of blockout models. This is just my way of doing things, and what I like, and sort of my process. And I just really want to emphasize that, because it can be intimidating when you see people's work that have been in the industry for a while. But I can pretty much guarantee you there's not a lot different that we do, at least for me, right? I can speak for myself that coming out of school, I'm sure that there's some different things. Well, I know that there's different things I think about when I'm doing a blockout, but as far as like the actual modeling process, that like nothing's really changed too much. I'm sure some of you are, asking about the try count or wondering about that. So I have two ways to answer that. If you want to show a studio, if you're trying to get hired at a studio and you want to show them that you understand low poly modeling, high poly sculpting, and then low to high poly bakes, then by all means, if you're doing a project for that reason, absolutely you should be paying attention to your try counts. You should be maximizing your texture sheets. Ideally, I think I could probably get this all in one sheet if I really wanted to. Now, the second way that I would answer the question of a try count is, if you are doing this purely because it's a personal project, then it really just doesn't matter. I mean, you could use as many texture sheets as you want to make something like this. But you know, it's left up to you know, whatever you are trying to accomplish in this. For me, you know, I'm obviously trying to, you know, show this is like kind of a portfolio piece, but also a teaching moment as well. But you know, you could see something like this, right, where, you know, this is it's pretty high. It's built to smooth right now. But there's also, you know, other pieces in here like this. I will probably end up just, you know, getting rid of a few, you know, edge loops in here, but for the most part, I'm gonna leave it because it's, you know, the intention behind this is to show off, you know, a pretty piece of art in the best way that I possibly can. So I really don't care in this case about that. Now, if I was working on this for work, you know, or if I was doing this professionally for whatever reason, I would absolutely be adhering to, you know, a lot of the times they have tri-count, you know, specifications. You know, if an asset is, you know, a certain size or whatever its purpose is, they'll, you know, you'll have someone being able to tell you, you know, a tri-count range that you should hit. But for personal work, I just really don't care. I'm just trying to, you know, make something really pretty the best way that I can. So that leads me into the next segment, which is you can see that I went ahead and grouped everything, and I just called this underscore working. And that's basically like, this is the file that I don't want to delete or get rid of. This has like all of the functioning pieces in here the way that, you know, they should be. And you can see in this next one, it's underscore ZB, which stands for ZBrush. This is going to be the object in the file that I send over to ZBrush to start working. And the reason why they're different is because what I like to do when I send an asset over from Maya into ZBrush is I like to group like assets that are like one another, or objects that are like one another, to save time. Because right now, I couldn't even tell you, but if I were to just go ahead and, you know, select this, if I were to grab this now and send this over, it would send it pretty much as a group. So everything in ZBrush would be one poly group. And if I had not had it in a group, it would, you know, be, all of these pieces would be split separately, which we don't want, because I don't plan on sculpting every single unique piece. I plan on sculpting pieces that are similar to one another and then duplicating them later on. So to showcase what I mean by that, and make sure you have your ZBrush working file, because you don't want to obviously delete anything. So like pieces, right? So I'm going to go ahead and look at, you know, the hinge piece here. And I'm going to go ahead and basically just start deleting pieces that are all duplicates of one another. And I know that there's a lot of these sort of bolt pieces here. Typically what I do is, if I know that I want a bolt or some kind of screw, I will just make one of them and then I will duplicate them around. So I'll come back to this because I'm not sure which one I want to actually do yet. So I'll come back to these little tiny bolt pieces. So also looking around, you can see that I have, you know, two handles that are identical. So there's no need to sculpt this again or two times. Okay. Now you can see for all of these, the little mason jars in here, I'm gonna go ahead and move this back. I probably just want one. There's no need to sculpt all of them. And because it's glass and it's not like too, you know, unique, there's probably not going to be that much sculpting that happens on the glass work. There'll probably be some, but for the most part, I will probably just do, you know, very minimal sculpting. Now you can see, you see how I have a handle here and a handle here. So the reason I would not do delete this one here is because it's different in size. I mean, you could potentially get away if this was for professional work. I would probably delete. Well, I'd probably go about making this a little bit different anyway, but I would probably delete this and have one handle. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave that there. For the books, I don't know exactly how I want to approach the books just yet, so I will probably leave them as is. My plan is probably to, I might use another texture sheet for these, we'll see, but for the most part, or at least for right now, I'm gonna go ahead and leave them alone. Now you can see that there's another open hinge piece here, and on the other side, I'm gonna go ahead and delete this one here. And I'm gonna go ahead and leave these little pieces here together. So when I see a bunch of assets like these, right, like the little drawers that are similar, the one thing I start to think about is how few of these do I need to help with repetition? Because obviously I could just sculpt one of these and just duplicate it across, but then you're gonna notice that this asset will be repeated, you know, however many times this is, and we don't want that. So, and because, you know, it's such a small, like these are just like little facades of the actual drawer. So realistically, you know, I could do probably like 4 and then just mix and match them. You can see this one's open. I have at least, looks like I've got 2 open drawers. So I'll probably end up just sculpting having one. So if I just want to kind of keep these all together, I'm going to go ahead and delete the ones over here. So basically I want 3 that are closed and I want 1 that's open. So we'll just keep this. And because this drawer isn't open, I think this is left over from before. So I'm probably just going to go ahead and close this up really quick here. Now you'll notice too, in the concept, there's a lot of these opal bits. And the reason I only did 1 is because I wanted to get, you know, 1 size of these, because what I like to do is instead of, you know, model out a bunch of these and place them everywhere, I'll probably end up just taking this and I'll sculpt on it. I'll duplicate this in ZBrush and sculpt on it a few variations in there. And then I'll bring them back in here and I'll probably Dynamesh and use those as my pieces. That's just the way I like to work, just because I think it's a little bit faster. One thing you did notice, at least I noticed, was in the concept there's like the little key that kind of goes in there for the bronze clasp. So because this thing's open, it doesn't require a key. What I thought would be funny to do, or at least kind of cute, is just to take the key and stick it on like this shelf right here, just because it just adds a little bit of character. Because if that was the arcane perfumist, I would open this and probably place the key somewhere where I wouldn't lose it. And again, if you look at something like this, right? Something like this is pretty simple, where you're like, oh yeah, you know, it's not a big deal. I'll just sculpt all these pieces of wood. You could do that, but I'm also thinking about how much texture space I have, right? I don't want to, you know, run out of room. I mean, we're gonna probably use like a 4K texture sheet, so it won't be that big of a deal. I don't necessarily want to sculpt, you know, 4 different pieces of wood right here. So what I would end up doing, what I'm gonna do, is I will get rid of at least 2 of them, because I can sculpt basically on each side, and then I can just, you know, rotate them 90 degrees or flip them around when I'm done with this here. So these bottles are kind of up in the forefront right here, or the foreground. And what I'll probably end up doing, because I believe what I did was just make one here and duplicate it here, and then this one's duplicated. So just to save time, I'm not going to make these bottles, you know, super crazy different from one another. So I'm just going to delete these back 2 here. So I only have 2 to sculpt. Let's see. So what I'll do, as you can see on the back side here, we have this cool little design. I think what I'll do for now is I'm going to go ahead and just leave this alone and not delete one of the sides, because what I can do is sculpt with symmetry on. So basically what that means is if I were to just take this one piece in ZBrush and I sculpted on it, and then when I brought it back in and duplicated it over, there might be a lot of marks that I had made that obviously show the very obvious repeat in here. So by just bringing in both of them, you can be really conscious about how much detail you put onto one side and have it reflect on the other side. Okay, so moving right along. So with this chest here, we have these pieces of wood on this side and on this side. So let's go ahead and delete these. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all of these little bolts here on this side, because I know for sure I'll end up using at least one on the other side. And I'll get rid of the bolts down here as well. And I'll go ahead and get rid of this piece of paper. And I believe I have this little kind of like cube thing in here for part of the hinge on the other side. So I can go ahead and get rid of that as well, since that's the pretty much the exact same size. Let's see, I believe the drawers are probably the same size as well. They're not, but the good news is that they're the same width and they're only just slightly off in their size from one another. So let's go ahead and delete this drawer. And then it doesn't matter if you decided to come in here and sculpt and then, obviously take this drawer back over here and then do something like this and squish it. That's totally fine, right? Like that's not a big deal. It's not enough of a difference in squishing the mesh to really call for a new piece. If you had to squish it down like this, right, something like that, you would for sure want to sculpt a new piece because that's too much of a stretch to keep it the same object. I think what I'll do is I'm going to actually go ahead and save this bolt here because I don't want to save these. These are at a 45 degree and I'll probably end up sculpting it as a 45 degree angle right here. If there's anything that weird that happens, I'll probably end up fixing that. I'll probably put this back down to 0. Yeah, we'll just go ahead and delete these up here. And the reason I'm going to go ahead and leave this little hinge piece alone is because I don't think this piece is different. I think it's actually the same as this piece, but I stretched it a little bit. So I might just leave this one alone for now. I will leave these straps. Basically, I'll probably leave these ones alone and not delete one of them just because they are kind of different. But if I end up sculpting one of these and then when I'm in ZBrush and realize that it's not going to make that much of a difference, then I'll probably delete this one over here. So that'll be fine. And you can always, if you realize that you need to delete a piece in ZBrush for whatever reason, you definitely can. Not a big deal. But this is part of my process. This will save you so much time in the long run when you start to plan stuff out like this. Because in all honesty, even like a piece like this, right, when the whole thing is complete, this is pretty intimidating. Like this, to me, I look at this and I can just kind of think about how many hours it's going to take me to sculpt all of this. So thinking about pieces and breaking them down in their most simple forms, to me, is just super helpful. Okay, so there's a few more pieces I think we can get rid of. We can get rid of this side as well. I think for the most part, that's as many pieces as I want to go ahead and delete. And what we can start to do next is we can prep this for ZBrush. So I'm going to basically start combining pieces that are going to be Dynamesh together with their polygroups turned on. So you'll see what I mean by that a little later when we get into ZBrush. But basically pieces that are alike. So these 3 pieces are all the same boards here, basically. So I'll go ahead and start combining those. These 3 planks of wood here I can combine. And I'll go ahead and combine the little drawer things right here. Not the knobs can be separate. Actually, now that I think about it, I can just have 1 knob. I don't need to have 4. And I can combine the bottles. Notice how I'm not actually combining, the cork and the bottle here and like something like this, because these are 2 separate. Like this is going to be glass. This will be completely sculpted on separately. And if I Dynamesh these 2 together, this isn't something that I would, necessarily do. And I could actually even combine this glass bottle down here. That'll save some time. Now, with something like this, I could easily combine all of these pieces here. And a lot of this will make a lot more sense when we get inside ZBrush. But something else I should mention too is I combine assets inside of Maya that will be either Dynameshed in a similar way or that will be smoothed in a similar way inside of ZBrush, right? So these bottles, for example, if I brought these in here, I could just subdivide these because these have edge loops that support subdivisions, versus if I just take something like this that has no subdivisions, they have no actual supporting edge loops to make this smooth, this is something that I can take into ZBrush, and I can just Dynamesh, and it will just remain, 90-degree corners and edges. It'll be hard edges versus something like this, which I'll actually need to probably go in and add some edge loops in here, because I want to keep this nice curve here. And if I were to Dynamesh this inside ZBrush as is, it doesn't respect smoothing groups, so it's going to make basically all of these faces here, it would make them look like this inside ZBrush. It would make them hard edges, and we don't want that, because then I'd have to go through and smooth that back out. So a lot of this will make sense once we get inside ZBrush. Actually, I guess we don't need this here either. But like you can see, since this piece is attached and these have like nice curves in here, let's see, it looks like this one is smoothed properly, so I'll need to go through and add in a bunch of edge loops here. So I'll do that a little later. So let's go through, those are combined. I'm gonna go ahead and combine basically this entire chest here. And again, the other reason I'm doing this is because it just saves a ton of time. All right, so I went ahead and just combined all of the similar groups together that are going to be Dynameshed or smoothed together in a similar way. And I'm sure even if there's a couple of things that I might have missed, I can always just come back in here and, regroup things if I need to. A lot of the times I'm going to figure this stuff out when I start to get into ZBrush and start to look at all my groups and make sure that everything was grouped properly. But now you can see that this looks very, well, it's less intimidating now when you actually look at all of the pieces that you end up needing to sculpt after all. So what I'll do is I'm just going to go ahead and take all these combined pieces that I had made and put them back inside the group now that we have that. And sometimes what I've done in the past is I've taken, certain pieces like bottles or something, and I've completely removed them and centered them in world space, so that way I could sculpt on it when I'm in ZBrush in the 0, but none of this stuff is going to have symmetry except for this back piece here, which I actually need to go ahead and combine, and I'll put back in there. And so that makes it really easy, because I'm just going to sculpt this like I would sculpt anything that doesn't have symmetry on it. Alright, so this pretty much wraps up the Blockout section of the tutorial. So I'm going to basically go ahead and I'm going to just take this group as is. I'm going to export it and I'm going to import it into ZBrush. So I will see you in the next video.